Turned up. Really glad to be here. I've come up from London for this, and as a Yorkshireman, I'm very glad indeed to be back in my home county for this debate, even though I am from completely the opposite end of the county, but never mind. Tonight we have Andrew Cooper from the Green Party, Joe Otten from the Liberal Democrats,
Hi.
Michael Naughton from the Conservatives, and David Wildgoose from the English Democrats. We're here as part of a, might seem small, but feel that we are part of a pan-European movement at the moment. There's a campaign across Europe called We Promise, which is about trying to get digital rights to be somewhere on the European agenda. Open Rights Group, who have put on this event tonight in Sheffield, work on these issues within the UK and also in Brussels. And this is part of that campaign, so we're talking to MEPs and candidates to try and get digital rights to be somewhere that's talked about a bit more by our representatives in Brussels. So a little bit just about how we're going to run it tonight. Obviously it's not quite as much in the audience as we'd have hoped for. I'll give all the candidates a chance to have a couple of minutes to give an opening statement about where they stand on issues to do with the internet technology, the digital economy and digital rights. Then I have plenty of questions which I can run with, and I'll be happy to hear any questions from you guys as well. And then we can finish off with the candidates giving a quick summary of where they stand. It is part of the We Promise campaign, and I think David Wildgoose is the only one here to have signed it so far. We'll see if we can persuade any of the others that it's something they want to be on board with. So, who'd like to start? Andrew, would you like to start?
Looking through the charter, and I just want to say that yes, I have signed the charter.
Yeah.
Quite happy with that. And be quite open about that. There's a lot of synergy here with the Green Party. Agrees with at the European level. In Madrid in May, the European Green Party Council came up with the following aims related to digital rights. The Green aims are the development of open government as part of the digital commons, providing access to documents more proactively on all levels of government, free and easy access to governmental documents on the internet, more frequent use of the internet for consultation of citizens, better provisions for the European Citizens Initiative, research into safe technology for secure e-voting systems, educational programs for young and older people to be able to use the new technologies safely and smartly, sharing of educational material on the internet, free speech in the digital commons only restricted by national law, protection of whistleblowers, safeguarding digital rights outside the EU in our external relations by states as well as companies. So if you look at that alongside the Charter, there's an awful lot there which actually matches that, and so I think in many ways we're quite in tune with what's going on, and I was quite pleased to sign the Charter.
Thank you very much. David Wildgoose, would you like to continue?
Yes, I would hope that everybody agrees with the principle of freedom of speech, which is of course the freedom to speak freely in public, and of course that should also apply over the internet, which of course is now a digital commons, and speaking freely in public in that fashion as well. I would actually point out that there's another way as well, and that is that you should also have the right to speak freely in private without interference. So I would actually also argue for encryption rights as being a very important and crucial tool against oppression and so on. In fact, it was Queen Elizabeth who said that we do not make windows into men's souls, and that was actually all about judging people by their actions rather than by what they say or may think. And so this is an ancient English tradition, so naturally it is supported by the English Democrats. So freedom of speech, freedom of encryption for both public and private matters.
Thank you very much. Joe Otten?
Thank you. So I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate, so number 3 candidate on the list, and a councillor in Sheffield, representing Dawn Topley. and occasionally, as I says in my org meetup profile, occasional software developer, but it's a while since I wrote anything I've never written anything you've heard of. I've not signed the charter. I broadly support it, but it does go. It is making some quite big demands, and I'm quite happy to have a discussion. Things will become clearer over the meeting. I've not ruled out signing it, but possibly it goes a bit too far in some areas. Possibly there are things that you would end up having to compromise on, and you have put all your demands in there, which is great, but that obviously makes it much harder to commit to it. I think our record as a party in standing up for digital rights is very good. We have, you can remember back before the 2010 election, the Digital Economy Act going through the wash-up process, and Liberal Democrats did a lot of work resisting some of the clauses in that the Conservatives and Labour said, oh yeah, we can agree on that, let's just rush it through. And particularly some of the measures related to the blocking of internet connections as a result of the coalition coming in were never implemented, and I think parts of that have been repealed. So there's that. I mean, MEPs have done some good work on data protection and other things in the European Parliament. I think if you look at our entire record on that, it's good, and that's something I'd want to support. Going through the Charter, transparency, access to documents is right. I think you are talking about, you do say all European languages. There's an awful lot of European languages. I don't know if that means you want a lot more spent on translation, so again, I'm not sure what that means. Data protection, privacy, I agree. Unrestricted access to the internet and online services, I agree. Update of copyright legislation and patents legislation, I think is long overdue. I think the patent system we have seems to, the main activity it kind of mitigates towards is massive legal disputes between massive multinational companies which spend billions of pounds on legal battles, claiming billions of pounds worth of damages from each other. And you need to have a stack of patents so that when somebody claims you infringe one of theirs, you can claim they're infringing one of yours. And that's more or less all that happens. And there are so many patents there. If you have an original idea, searching and so on is a huge burden. I mean, I was running a small software company a few years ago, and I didn't look at it, and I didn't look at patents. It was never going to be the sort of thing that a route I would have gone down to protect any of my IP. And that's wrong. It needs to be there to support innovation and not to stifle it.
Okay, Joe, we're going to work.
Oh, sorry, I was going to go through. Okay, all right.
Over the course of the evening. So.
Okay. Well, I'm sure the rest will come up. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Joe. Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Naughton. I'm from the Conservative Party. I'm actually from Sheffield as well. Most of these events seem to be held in North and East Yorkshire. I don't know why, since all the population is in South Yorkshire, really, but we are all Yorkshire MEP candidates. It's nice to be at home. I was born about 10 minutes from here. I grew up in Sheffield. I still live here. I graduated from the University of Sheffield, so I know the city quite well. To get to the point on digital rights, it seems to me as a Conservative that we're essentially dealing with a trade-off between liberty and security. And I think most people on this panel, I think most people in the audience would admit that, or would think that liberty and security are both positive things that we should be trying to maximise. So essentially we're dealing with a trade-off. I'm reminded here of a good quote from Ben Franklin saying, "Those who would give up a little liberty to purchase a little temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security." Now, 20 years later, another founding father of the American Republic, John Adams, said, "Liberty once lost is lost forever." Now, does this therefore mean that liberty is a good to be pursued at all costs? That would certainly be the romantic view, and there are people on the far left in European politics who put forward that point of view. I think here of the Swedish Pirate Party, for example. But I would argue no, I think it goes a little bit too far. People do have a right to privacy, but people also have a right to be safe. So, at what point then should we draw the line? Where should this trade-off be? Well, before we begin our 2-hour debate, perhaps a little shorter, actually, Ed, I don't think that there is a right answer. I think that there'll be different answers at different times. I think powers can and should and must flow to the state and flow back from the state, depending on the external threats we are facing. Now, I think here there are good precedents in British history. I'm hoping the English Democrat fellow will forgive me for using the word British for a second. In 1919, we'd introduced ID cards during the war, during the First World War. And we decided that given the war was won, we could get away, we could do away with these ID cards. In 1939, we introduced them again, and in 1952, far too long after the end of the war, we abolished them. So this is a good precedent of going a little bit towards security and then pulling a little bit back towards liberty once the threat is gone. I think that when we deal with digital rights on the internet, we're dealing with a situation that's remarkably similar, and I think that's the appropriate response. So before we begin, I'll give you my answer already. I don't think there's a complete black and white answer to the trade-off between liberty and security. I think it's constantly in flux, and I think we have to deal with the situation and the threats that we face as we face them.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a good starting point then is to talk about surveillance. It's one of the points of the We Promise Charter. Obviously, the surveillance programmes revealed by Edward Snowden have been much in the news over the last year. What is your position on the UK's internet surveillance programmes? Do you think they are right, or they're doing the right thing? What would your point of view be on that?
I'll just kick
sure.
off. I mean, as far as Edward Snowden did, I think he did liberty a great service by exposing what was common practice in terms of the surveillance of citizens. And one thing that several Greens have in fact asked for is to give asylum in the EU to Edward Snowden, which of course wouldn't go down too well with the United States, but it would say what our standards are in terms of what we regard as being important for our citizens. And so yes, wide-scale, unwarranted surveillance of individuals is wrong, because it's this is no trade-off in liberty. It's completely negating it. It's negating liberty and saying these things are not important anymore. I think anybody who's got a liberal approach to things would really take that view.
Otten?
Yeah, I support this part of the this clause of the Charter. I think it's interesting that we had a debate not long ago about the Snoopers Charter, about the mass surveillance of communications data and communications metadata, and there were proposals that were blocked and governed by the Liberal Democrats quite rightly in the end. And then it turned out that the security services was just doing all this anyway. Now, that's not an acceptable situation. I think it's absolutely right that there is provision for surveillance of some kind, but it needs to be subject to judicial oversight. That is in my view, the gold standard is that the acid test is that if the judges believe that a measure is proportionate, that's fine. If you want to bypass judicial oversight, that means you're saying you want an oversight power, you want surveillance power of ordinary citizens that a judge is not going to be convinced is proportionate, and I don't accept there's any justification for that. So I absolutely support that clause of the Charter.
Michael Naughton?
I think I agree with most of what Joe said. I'm going to bring something else into the debate. There was a speech recently given, rather unprecedented actually, by the head of SIS, commonly known as MI6. And he said, British policy at the minute is not to use intelligence that's been obtained through illegal means, including mass surveillance, or torture. And when asked the question, would you therefore allow a terrorist act to go ahead knowing that the data that you have, which could prevent it, has been obtained illegally? He said yes. Now, I take Andrew's point here saying there are some points, some lines that we must not cross. And certainly I think individual liberty is a very important act, but I would never, ever, if I were a policymaker, allow a terrorist attack to go ahead simply to make a point in principle. I'm very conscious here that I am a white, English-speaking, heterosexual male. It's not particularly difficult to be me. And when I was younger, I lived in Paris, and I saw constantly young Arabic boys being put against the wall and being frisked by the police. They had identity cards, and the police essentially had a reason to harass them. I understand that the state is made up of individuals. It's far from perfect. And that if we give tools to the agents of the state for harassment, eventually harassment will take place. However, while we can draw the line at racism, we can draw the line at persecution of individuals, I don't think the threats we face are small by any means. The July bombings are 9 years in the past now, but there are other bombings planned. I think we need to be a little bit careful before we say every agent of the state is necessarily evil, all surveillance is bad, I think we need to bear in mind what we could face and what we could face tomorrow, which could completely skew the debate the other way.
David Wildgoose.
I think one of the problems we have is what it is actually now possible for states to actually do. We are losing tax discs from our cars because they say they can just use automatic number plate recognition to identify whether or not you've paid your tax. But of course, as that data gets collected, that means they can effectively track your movements across the country. And they can do that, of course, with mobile phones and a whole host of other means as well, use of credit cards, you name it. The ability of the state to actually perform mass surveillance is made easier and easier by the massive increase in computing power at their disposal. And so there's a very important essay by David Brin about an open society and acknowledging this, acknowledging that there's nothing we can do about that and that what we actually have to do to ensure that an open society continues is to actually make this data available for everybody else. So it's not just the people in charge tracking us, we're tracking them. And it's only I think by that means can you actually guarantee what is done with that kind of surveillance data, by saying that anything that you can see about us, we can see about you.
Would anyone in the audience like to come in at this point? Well, I'll come back to the panellists in a second.
Sure. Just one comment. It's quite emergent to say allow terrorist attacks and attacks to take place, but that happens all the time. The police will not prosecute particular people because they don't want to compromise their intelligence gathering aspects. Same with terrorists. So it happens all the time.
Well, there's one thing surely not prosecuted somebody.
Sorry, I don't think he's quite finished yet.
Raids were allowed to take place because we want to compromise the German codes. So to argue that you would never ever allow a terrorist attack to go ahead when you can stop it is nonsense.
Why?
There are circumstances. You would not want to compromise if you had a particular piece of technological systems that once it was used, it would be clear what that was done. There might be very easy ways of circumventing it.
Perhaps I didn't explain my point though. The speech, as outlined last week by the current SIS leader, is to allow a terrorist atrocity to take place knowingly that we could prevent it if that information is obtained illegally.
That's quite normal. I can understand that and accept it.
Yeah? Because as I've understood your argument, you're saying that there's a greater good of protecting one's source, which is not really the point of principle that I understand.
Let's say a Malta is a classic case.
Yeah?
They didn't want to give away the fact that they knew German codes. So they did allow raids to go ahead, they allowed attacks to occur because they didn't want to compromise.
But there was presumably then a greater good, and they thought perhaps they could save more lives in so doing?
Greater good is the system that you have.
Okay.
I mean, in the case of Malta, they always said that providing you get two other sources were believable, then they would use that data, and that's what they did. And I'm sure that's what they're doing in the intelligence community. They'll look very hard to find another way of saying this is our data. I mean, it's very interesting.
Andrew Cooper, I think you had some.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I was just wondering about the practical implications of what Michael was saying. Are you saying that that a mass surveillance program is justified on the basis of what you might pick up? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying that, on the basis of, well, we might stop a terrorist attack if we have mass surveillance of X million people?
It depends on what you mean by mass surveillance. If you mean an East German Stasi-style state where 1 in 8 citizens works for the security services, then clearly not. I think
we don't need that anymore.
Because I outlined originally, then that would be too far to the security. But if you said, for example, mass surveillance of email using keywords linked to whatever threat you picked, really, to paedophilia, to terrorist atrocities, then yes, that would be my opinion.
But I suppose what you're in fact saying is saying, because technology is so good now, we don't need 1 in 8 people to be members of the security services because we can do it much more effectively through use of digital technology, through the internet. That's not actually making things necessarily better in terms of liberty. It's just saying that you're more efficient at actually monitoring people. and it's more cost effective to
Well, there's levels of
take our
monitoring.
liberty away from us than it was
Monitoring
before.
somebody's email communications, for example, looking for patterns or keywords or metadata, as Joe mentioned before, I think is justified. It's a different opinion, but it's certainly mine.
Keywords.
Hold on a minute. Could I just point out that the Taliban and other Islamic terrorist groups and so on deliberately didn't use mobile phones and email and so on because they just assumed they'd be monitored. So, in effect, you're monitoring us, ordinary citizens. And if you heard of Bruce Schneier, cryptogram and so on, and he actually makes some big arguments about security with regards to what you really need to do is to have a system whereby when anything happens, and it can be an accident, it doesn't have to be a terrorist act, it can be an accident, something happens, you have the facility to quickly go to the aid of people, hospital facilities are provided and so on, and that you can quickly deal with any natural disaster as well as any artificial terrorist disaster, and that actually makes more sense. It makes a more robust society.
Thanks. I mean, can I just make a slightly more broader thematic point? And that is, I'm concerned when it comes to legislation regarding matters of technology that, because, I mean, normally Parliament obviously scrutinises legislation and says, you know, the system, the machine, whether it's the security services or whoever wants this, is it a proportionate thing, you know, and the Parliament is there as defender of the rights of the public. But when it comes to technology, I think Parliament is slightly cowed because, generally speaking, MPs don't understand it. And the same probably goes for MEPs. And so we get lots of cases of activities which you do with a computer being made illegal or more illegal than doing the same thing without a computer. And similarly with surveillance, things being, oh yeah, let's listen into that because it might be useful, when listening to the same thing that is done without technology, we would find outrageous. Now, suppose next week the technology exists to monitor all face-to-face conversations between people. Now, if they're being consistent, the security service says, well, we need that information. We need to know what people are saying to each other because they might be planning terrorist atrocities. So we should definitely use this technology. And Parliament might look at that and think, hang on, that's everything. That's everything I'm doing. You want to have mass surveillance on. Well, and Parliament will probably stop there, and Parliament will be right. But because it's a technology thing, Parliament is slightly cowed and says, oh, okay, yeah, it sounds very important, and I'm a bit worried what all this technology is going to lead to. And it goes through. So I think that's just a thematic point. Yeah.
Okay. I think we had a question from the audience.
Okay, so I'm interested in how you feel about how it's actually targeted. This depends a bit where you say, should we survey everything and see what pops up, like you're saying, keyword searching, or should you target surveillance to certain individuals when you feel that that's necessary? But if you do target them, then should you tell them afterwards? One of the things that we campaign for is to actually make it very transparent, and then you actually tell people that the police are being part of the event, so that they're aware that privacy has been infringed.
Yeah. Okay, so where do we stand on blanket versus target surveillance and on notifying the targets of that surveillance after the fact? Michael?
Okay. I suppose we're talking now about signal intelligence or human intelligence, and I think signal intelligence, pure data. Data is not information. I think it should only ever be a tool to complement human intelligence. Ultimately, it's people that commit crimes, it's people that are threats. Binary code is never a threat. For your second question, I actually don't think that people should be told ex post facto that they were surveyed. I pick up the point that the gentleman made there. Somebody may wish to know that they were a target of surveillance, but that may then alert his friends. And that would certainly be where I would stand on this. I think there's a justified argument for the security services to keep their dealings secret, or at least subject to parliamentary oversight. But I don't think any individual has an intrinsic right to know that they were targeted by the security services.
Regardless of whether they were guilty of any crime or not?
Yes, as long as there's reasonable oversight, call it parliamentary or judicial.
Okay. Anyone else like to chip in?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I would say that I think the point is made and is correct, that it may be damaging to do that. And typically, if you have somebody who is a terrorist threat, they are ongoing a threat, and there might never be a conclusion to the investigation. But on the other hand, if there is a case where somebody is monitored and then it turns out there was nothing there, that person is just a regular citizen, I think they should be told. Now, I recognise that it might be quite difficult to write a law that distinguished, black from white in every case. But I think we should distinguish between the necessary protection of security on the one hand, and measures that are there just to hide the blushes of the security services, occasionally investigating the wrong person, because that actually, if that is known, then that's a good thing, and it will lead to greater scrutiny and greater hopefully improvements in the future.
I think I'd like to bring in an issue which Andrew brought up at the start about the asylum for Edward Snowden, and whether we think that it is appropriate for the European Union to offer asylum to whistleblowers such as Snowden. The Green Party voted for that in the European Parliament, I believe.
Yep.
Would anyone have a view on that? Should we offer Snowden asylum within the European Union?
It's a good idea, isn't it?
As a general principle,
Wildgoose?
as a general principle, I have no problem with that. Although I would actually say there's a very good article in The Atlantic this month. Anybody reads The Atlantic magazine? And it's actually about Snowden, in that basically you have rights given you by the state to which you have responsibilities, that you give responsibilities to, and so on. So in this respect, Snowden has done us a favour, and so in this respect, I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to actually offer him asylum. However, I think there is actually a general principle that where security is concerned, it's not necessarily clear-cut. Now, as a general principle, I actually do support in the previous question, people should be told if they've been targeted by the security services and nothing's been found. Because one of the reasons for that is because it's too easy for allegations to be made. And snide remarks made about somebody that trigger these kind of investigations. And you're going around blissfully unaware of this. Or for people to do this maliciously, somebody they don't like, decide to make them a target of security services. This is why this is a defence against the misuse of those services, which is why I think you do have to actually inform people these things. Sorry, where were we? Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. On asylum for whistleblowers?
Yes, asylum for whistleblowers and for Snowden. Yes, certainly for Snowden, for the release of information regarding the illegal surveillance going on, absolutely, that should be protected. I understand there are further allegations that the security services are making about Snowden, that he revealed the identity or released information that would reveal the identity of agents, and that would be a crime, and he would be liable for prosecution for that if he was in this country. And I think so. You need to be a little bit careful about. I don't know whether those allegations are correct or not, and they may just be what security services will always say if you reveal information that they don't want revealed. But I would be slightly cautious about offering to asylum to somebody who is subject to a legitimate criminal investigation. However, certainly on the main story about Snowden, he's absolutely in the right, and he deserves it on every support.
Right. Can I just point out before I answer? I think subconsciously we've actually arranged ourselves from left to right. Because I'm becoming, I suppose, the pantomime baddie rather than inadvertently disagreeing more romantically. I'm not a hardcore conservative. I am a conservative, but anyway. Right. Do I believe that we as the EU should offer asylum to Edward Snowden? First of all, to venture into UKIP for a second, it isn't an EU competence to offer asylum. This is a fundamentally political choice. And national security remains with the member states. I think it should remain with the member states. And there are very different points of view based on different historical experiences between, for example, Germany, which is very, very keen on digital rights, on individual protection, and slightly more security-focused states like Britain and France, which do face slightly different threats, mostly, I would argue, because of a more activist foreign policy. If asylum is to be offered, it is and should remain a member state choice, and the member state concerned would have to pick up the political pieces. On the wider note, I find myself agreeing with a lot of what Joe said. I think clearly the American security services had gone too far, and Ed Snowden did do a lot of good in bringing that to public attention. I think the Barack Obama administration has followed the right path now in backtracking on some of its activities. But I would also say that he did commit a crime. He did put people's lives in danger. There was a wonderful article about Kim Philby in yesterday's paper, who again acted for noble reasons. He believed genuinely in communism. He wanted to create a better society, but he also his actions led to people dying. So before we make of Ed Snowden a modern-day Robin Hood, a popular hero, I think we need to remember what he's done. And some of it was good, and some of it was less good. Some of it was, in fact, bad. It's not quite black and white. He's not, I don't think, a pure nobleman. And I think the fact that he's gone to Russia and not to a Western country, I suspect, reveals that.
Can I come
Please do.
back
Yeah,
with
quickly,
that?
yes.